Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with Richard Swinburne, the distinguished philosopher of religion, a retrospective of his views and arguments over his illustrious career, including on the Christian God and providence and the problem of evil. Richard is Emeritus Professor of the Philosophy of the Christian Religion at the University of Oxford. Richard, you agree that the problem of evil may provide a good argument against theism, but your opponents claim that the occurrence of evil provides a stronger argument against the existence of God than you are willing to allow. So, what enables you to limit the power of evil to refute the existence of God?
Yes, I don't say that it's any evidence for the existence of God. I just say it's not significant evidence against the existence of God. And that requires me to produce a theodicy. That is an account of why God would have allowed the evils of this world to occur. Evils are normally divided into two kinds: moral evils and natural evils. Moral evils are the ones either deliberately or through negligence brought about by humans, and natural evils are things like droughts and famines and earthquakes and diseases and so on, which are not brought about by humans. But some of them may be allowed to occur as a result of human negligence, but clearly most of them are not so allowed. Right. Natural evil. Let's start with moral evils. I think God's greatest gift to humans is the gift of free will, a limited free will. Of course, we have only a range of choice for each of us that we can make, but all the same, free will. This is a contentious philosophical issue, but we can't discuss it here, and I think it's an unresolved one. But I think the balance in this case is just about in favor of us having what is called libertarian free will. That is, free will to act independently of the causes acting upon us. Those causes may influence us, but they do not determine our actions. In that case, it's up to us what we do, and that's a great gift. But it wouldn't be very much of a great gift if the only choices were the choices that God approved of. If God is to give us real freedom to make a difference to things, he has to allow us the freedom to make a difference either for good or for evil. And in that way, he makes us what I have called mini creators. That is to say, we can make differences for good or ill to ourselves, to other people, and to the world. And that's a great gift. But of course, we may choose badly. And if we choose badly, then other people are going to suffer. And that is the initial reason why God allows such suffering, for the sake of the other people who have the choice of whether or not to bring it about. But it's also a choice for sufferers too, because sufferers do have a choice. If somebody is nasty to you, then you have a choice of either thinking to yourself, well, he can't help it, he was brought up that way, he's really nice after all, and so on. And to take a more different sort of example, if I get ill and other people aren't not nice to me, they just ignore me, they don't help, they say it's his own fault, I have the opportunity to not to hold it against them. Okay, so in this process of allowing us to have choices for good or ill, we don't merely have the immediate effect, but we gradually affect our own character, because each time you make a good choice, it becomes easier to make a good choice at that time sort next time. And each time you make a bad choice, it becomes easier to make a bad choice of that sort. And so we form our own characters by our choices. We form our own characters, whether we are the victims of others or whether our suffering is brought about by natural causes. And so we have this great opportunity to make ourselves, as well as the world and other people, for good or ill. Now, some people may think, well, God doesn't have the right to do this sort of thing. But of course he does. And we can see that by the fact that although God is our greatest benefactor, he causes us to exist and keeps us in being, and provides all the good things that this world has, we have two sorts of human benefactors who also benefit us: our parents and the state. We are our parents, and I'm talking not just about biological parents, but parents who care for us through our childhood years. They clearly impose on us suffering for a good cause. Suffering consists in having happen to you what you don't like to have happen, and parents are generally thought to have the right to do that, to send people to school when they don't want to go to school, even to send someone to a neighborhood school that they don't want to go to for the sake of others. And in these, parents have the right to stop their children going on particular holidays abroad or associating with other people, particular other people. All that for the sake of the child, and one of them, things I mentioned, for the sake of others as well. And if parents have the right to impose on us limited suffering, then surely the God who is responsible for the existence of the parents, and all that they can do and all that we can do, has a much greater right. Likewise, the state, we owe our security and the fact that we are not living in a Wild West situation and can grow up peacefully, to the state. And the state has the great rights over us. It imposes taxes on us we don't want to pay. But it imposes other things too. And I think the greatest example of that is when the country is fighting a just war. The state has the right to conscript people, and that is to impose a serious danger of suffering and death on them. So if parents and the state, who are rather limited benefactors, have the right to impose on us suffering for a good cause, then surely God has the right to impose on us suffering for a good cause. And the good cause in which parents and the state have the right to impose on us, and so a fortiori God does too, is not merely for our own sake, but also sometimes for the sake of others, as when, with my example, when parents send their children to a neighborhood school that the child doesn't want to go to in order to cement relations in the community. It's not done for the child's benefit, but for the sake of the community. And likewise, when the state conscripts people, it's not principally for the benefit of those conscripted, who could easily get out of the way and go abroad, but for the sake of those older and weaker people whom they are defending. And so, if the state can do this, God can do a lot more to us in the way of making us suffer, if it is the only way in which a particular benefit can be given to us or to someone else.
How do you factor in the amount of evil, the clear enormity of gratuitous evil in the world?
Well, the two conditions which limit a parent and the state's right to impose evils are first that it's for the benefit of the person who suffers or someone else, but secondly, the very fact that they are and remain benefactors. That is to say, if the parents have to, for example, cause a baby to have a painful injection for the sake of the baby surviving, then in a war situation, say when there are no anesthetics, then that is only something the parent has the right to do, and the parent has the right to do because the parent will continue to provide a life for that baby, and so, as it were, the parent will compensate by the good life the parent provides for the baby by so that on the whole the baby's life is good. Well, the same applies to God. If God imposes us much more serious evils, as you rightly suggest, he has, as it were, to be on balance our benefactor. And he's able to do that in a way that parents and the state aren't, because if we are caused to suffer in a big way, then he can compensate us with a life after death in which, as it were, outweighs by a long way the horror involved.
The argument that evil does not count significantly against the existence of God is related to what you need is a life after death to make the compensation more than appropriate for the evil suffered.
Yes, that is true. I mean, in many cases, in most cases, if people do suffer, on the whole, their earthly life is good anyway on balance, but in certain cases it clearly isn't. But the second point I wish to make is God wishes us to form our own character. And this own character that he would wish us to form isn't just being fairly good people or moderately, more than that. He would want us to make us saints. And this means that he would like us, by our own choices, to make ourselves really dedicated to the good, dedicated to helping people, dedicated to doing the right thing by everybody, including God, and to enjoy doing it. And that's not something that many of us have really reached by the end of our lives, but that is clearly what God would hope for. And you can see that by asking yourself the question, what on earth was the point of God creating us? Was the point of God creating us to put us in a fairly comfortable world where there weren't any serious evils, so that we didn't have the choice of making ourselves saints, and then at the end letting us die? Surely not. God would want us to become saints. He would want us to become saints through our own choice. But we can only become saints if we force ourselves to be good, really good, to do the right thing, such as sacrifice our own life or our own well-being for the sake of others, and to like to do that. That's what the saints like. And that's what's worth keeping alive forever, because only people who are that sort of people would enjoy the life of heaven as it is pictured by Christian writers. And at the other end, also crucially, if somebody makes bad choices, bad choices, bad choices, they are gradually eliminating their moral sensitivity. That is to say, if they do a bad act and feel a bit bad about it, but nevertheless do an even worse act next time, they gradually lose the sense that any act is morally good, because to recognize an act as morally good is to have some inclination to do it. And one gets the feeling that some of the nastiest SS guards in the war had simply eliminated their moral sense. And God would allow someone to choose not to be the sort of person that God wanted them to be. That is what parents do in a modest way. That is to say, they would like their children to be good children, but nevertheless, they don't force them to be good children. They allow them to make bad choices within limits. But God, being God, who can have far greater rights over us and far greater possibilities for us in the afterlife, would also further like to give us the choice of actually rejecting everything he stands for. The comparison I make is to a suitor. The suitor is can ask the beloved she will marry him, and the beloved has the right to say no, and the suitor has the right to ask again and again. But the suitor does not have the right to ask an infinite number of times. One must take no for an answer. In that case, the suitor must take no for an answer. God must take no for an answer. And so he gives people the choice of totally rejecting God. But that will only come if they have the choice of producing a horrendous evil. Ordinary bad people have a bit of conscience about certain minor things, and that can, as it were, be built up. If they choose to do the right thing, then they will become better. But if they've made themselves totally evil, they can't choose the right thing anymore. But that's their choice. So the horrendous evils, which are not so horrendous if you consider the afterlife situation, are allowed by God to happen in order that we may make ourselves not merely fairly good or fairly bad people, but saints or very evil people. And it's very good for us that we have that significant choice, but it can only be ours if the choices before us are big, serious choices.
Okay, Richard, what I'd like to do now is just ask a few very pointed questions and get very short answers. So, number one, how do you weight the argument from evil against the existence of God with your various arguments for the existence of God? You talk about cosmological argument, the design argument, teleological, religious experience, miracles, providence, the nature of consciousness, morality. There's a whole series of different arguments for the existence of God. So how do you weight the argument from evil?
Well, I weight it as neither, possibly a bit against, but not seriously against, for the reasons I've given. It is really a development of the argument from providence. The argument from providence is God gives us many choices of making a difference to the world, but it has to. But if he's to give us serious choices, then it's when evil may arise.
What about animal pain and suffering during the hundreds of millions of years of evolution? If there is a God, I think we'd say God created evolution. That's a whole other subject, of course. Does animal pain and suffering count as a part of the argument from evil against God?
Well, it depends on which animals suffer and how much they suffer. And
Well,
we don't know that.
Getting eaten alive is suffering, I would think, for virtually every animal.
Well, I'm not so sure of that.
Okay.
Though you are come from a neurological background, I think that there is no good reason at all to suppose that anything below the rank of vertebrates has pain. Of course, they avoid noxic dangers, but as you know, in human beings, when we are subject to bodily damage, there are two nerve channels, one of which leads to our aversive behavior, running away, pulling away the hand which has touched the hot plate, and the other of which goes to the brain and causes our pain. Now, you can have one without the other, and the mere fact that fish don't like things that sting them doesn't show that the fish feels pain at all. It just because that fish may only have the aversive reaction.
Sure, but vertebrates.
So the question is, which animals have goings on in their brain which causes pain? And my understanding is that in human beings, the nerve cells in the brain which cause pain are in the prefrontal cortex, which the animals, invertebrates, don't have. And indeed, my information is mammals don't have any seriousness. It's only the higher animals, if I may use this word, who do feel pain.
There's certainly a great deal of higher vertebrates at whatever level you want to say that have suffered pain. So let me ask this.
How do you know that?
Well, I mean, how do I know that you suffer pain if you touch a
because I have that in my brain, and you have in your brain you have in your brain the same things that are the same parts that I have in my brain.
Sure. I think
the issue arises as to whether creatures that don't have the same parts in their brain feel pain.
Sure.
And the mere fact that they feel aversion doesn't show that. I'm not saying I'm just saying certain only that the higher animals and that feel pain. And I have reason to suppose that they don't feel nearly as much as us, because the parts of the in the chimpanzee, for example, the prefrontal cortex, which is our nearest relative, the prefrontal cortex is a third of the size that it is in us. So, okay, so they don't feel, if I'm right, and I agree this is a controversial matter, and I don't think it's going to be solved very well at all, because animals don't talk, and how can we know, and so on. But the limited evidence I've seen and the limited papers I've read on this suggest that. Okay, so why do they suffer at all? Well, there's a point I didn't mention in connection with humans, that although doing the right thing voluntary, freely, is good, it's in a more limited way good for us if we are made to do a good thing, even though we haven't chosen to do it. I mean, prisoners, if prisoners are made to clean the sewers, that's far better for them, because they're doing some good to others, than if they are just made to break up rocks for no good purpose at all. Okay, and also, if people suffer not through their own fault or anything like that, or just as a result of accidents, that's good not merely for the choices it gives to others and so on, but it's good for them that what happens to them is a benefit to others. For example, if someone is badly maimed or killed in a railway accident, what his relatives say is, this is terrible, but thank goodness it served some good purpose, because it led to a reform of the system and so on. Now, bearing that point in mind, I don't think animals have free will, but they nevertheless, their pain is a cause of it. If their suffering can, not through their choice or through anyone else's choice, be a benefit to others. The most conspicuous example of that is where the mother of some offspring tries to decoy predators by exposing herself, and in order that she may suffer, and they get away. Now, that's a great benefit for her, that her life has been of use in saving the offspring, even though it's going to, doing so is going to lead to her death and pain on the way. And I think that applies fairly generally to animals, that they do useful things, and that pain is involved in that. And their useful things, their good actions, is a great benefit for other animals and themselves. They know that something happening to them is going to is causing them pain and will cause them more pain. But they run away. They save their own lives, not merely the lives of others whom they decoy, and that is good for them, that they can benefit themselves. And the pain provides an opportunity for them to benefit themselves and to benefit others, and that's good so long as it's not too much pain. If it's too much pain, then it'd have to be, free will would have to be involved, but it doesn't always have to be involved.
So, is there any amount of evil, any amount of pain and suffering for humans or others that could empower the argument from evil to refute God's existence? Any amount?
Yes, certainly. But note in the human case, for example, that human life is very short. And if we suffer too much pain, we just die. So in the scale of eternity, it's a pretty small amount. If it was a lot more and for a lot longer period, I would be unhappy. I mean, I wouldn't think the argument was as strong.
Good. I remember in one of our earlier conversations about evil, you said something that sounds simple, but is actually very profound, that God did not create a toy world.
Yeah.
And to me, that sounds like a superficial answer, but it's actually a quite deep and a profound thought.
Well, thank you. That is what I was being saying with regard to the horrendous evils. God and someone else has used the phrase that God wouldn't create a moral kindergarten.
Richard, the hiddenness of God is said to count against the existence of God, developed notably by John Schellenberg, whom I believe you supervised for his DPhil degree at Oxford. If it's the case that God keeps hidden to enable character to be built better, what can you, how can you justify that some people don't see God and therefore may do things that are inappropriate?
There's a number of points in connection with hiddenness. Schellenberg's point is that many people who seriously try and find out whether there's a God are convinced on rational grounds that there isn't a God, and they never had an experience of them. And so Schellenberg argues a good father wouldn't treat his children like that. He would make himself known to them. And against that, I make 2 points. The first point is that if we all believed that there was a God, no one would have the opportunity to help other people to believe that there's a God. Many people come to believe that there's a God because other people help them to do that, and other people have the choice of whether or not to help them. So the agnostics' loss is often due to other people rather than themselves, and that is one of the free choices in this world. And it's good that we have the opportunity to help others in this respect. And the second point is, if we all knew that there was a God, and we're pretty certain of it. And we all knew that the good go to heaven and the bad don't. We wouldn't have very much temptation, the sort of temptation we in fact have, to do the bad, because we know that we will be punished for it. And I think God is looking for people who want to do the good because it's good, even though, of course, he will be greatly pleased that they do it. And there is a point in agnosticism being around and serious arguments against the existence of God being around, even though, of course, I think they don't work, in order to make there be some doubt about it. And that is helps people to do the good for the sake of the good. And a further point is, of course, that given life after death, the unavailability of God to some is only an inability in this life. And I can't see, given that there's life after death, why it has to come in, why God's making himself known to everybody has to come in this short period of our earthly life.
Does it then follow that all those people who do not build sufficient character during their current lives and therefore do not attain heaven or whatever the ultimate reward is, that none of those people would have fared better had God been open and obvious? Because if those people who did not qualify in this life would have qualified if God were more open and obvious, that would seem to counter the argument that God's hiddenness is a benefit, not a liability.
I didn't say it's a benefit. That is to say, it's an equally good situation that he would make himself known, for obvious reasons. But if he doesn't make it himself known, there is this other benefit that I pointed to. God gives different benefits to different people. One's not better or worse than the other. But if some people are ignorant, others can help them to see God. If others fail, then in virtue of other considerations, I don't think God sends them to hell. He gives them another chance.